Thank you, Jeff. That's beautiful. I love this new platform.
So do we.
Thank you. I was interested in what Bruce said this morning when he came in, and he was here for the first time, and he was looking around at churches and deciding where he would like to go, and he chose us, for which we are very grateful. But I realized at the same time that there are many people here who don't know a whole lot about me and why I talk the way I do and all of that. I talk the way I do because I'm from England. But also, I'm a retired pastor. I was a pastor for 35 years. I'm a retired pastor in what is sometimes known as the Churches of Religious Science or Science of Mind Centers, both of which decided to become one name, and we are all now Centers for Spiritual Living, and we are basically all metaphysicians. So that clears that up. Another thing I would like to clear up is any comments that have been made about the cookies that I bought this morning. Somebody asked me what they were called, and I'm forgetting where I was, said they were called Ugly Buggers. And then Lynn, forgetting where she was, said she thought Nipples of the Black Goddess would be a better name.
Thank you.
I didn't know she could turn scarlet. My topic, as announced in the newspaper today, was quantum physics, metaphysics, imagination, oh my. And it was oh my because there's so many more other things like that that go into that. But I had to make a kind of change of direction, just a little bit in what I want to talk about, because I heard a question asked on, I guess, the television, the news, or something like that, that rang many bells within me because I know I've been hearing the same kind of question being asked. And the question was, why does God not put a stop to this violence? And I really had to think about that. It's okay if I touch this?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And the answers, and there are many of them, of course, depending upon where you're from, what your culture is, what your religion is, what you've been brought up to think about, what you believe about God or what you think God is. All of those make a difference to why there are several answers to that question. Why doesn't God put a stop to this? And so to address science, we have to understand that science addresses the as-isness of what is. They look at what is, and then they want to find out, why is that what is? Okay. Then there's culture, the culture that you were brought up in. For example, you might be a Native American Indian, and you have a very beautiful culture, a belief about what God is, whether it is in the trees or in animals or many things that are wonderful to me to think about. Then we have metaphysics, which sometimes called New Thought. New Thought, which is at least 5,000 years old. It really is. It really is. And in metaphysics, we sometimes struggle with what I think of as the coming together of science and everything else to make good sense of how we live the way we live and what we would like to be living like. I have a quote for you from Dr. Holmes, and I don't usually bring a lot of little notes, but I did have to bring some today. Dr. Holmes, in the opening of the rewritten New Science of Mind textbook, which was about 1926, he wrote this as the opening sentence. We all look forward to the day when science and religion shall walk hand in hand through the visible to the invisible. And I want to say to Dr. Holmes, this is the time. This is the day. Now, we may not be exactly walking hand in hand, but we're on the same path and we're shoulder to shoulder, I suspect. There is much of science and religion coming together. Reluctance on parts of some, but it is working, and we are beginning to have a different understanding about that. Let's just, I'm only using 3 things here. Science, let's see, quantum physics, and metaphysics, and religion, just to make it shorter. Quantum physics, and I used to think about this when I was a little girl. I didn't understand any of it, but I understood that people like to take things apart. I had a father that liked to take things apart and find out how it worked in the middle. And that's how I used to think of quantum physics. And I used to wonder, how small can they go? Because I recognized as I got old enough to go to school that science investigated and into things that got smaller and smaller and smaller. And what they finished up with, and I am not a scientist, so if I'm wrong, that's okay. What they've finished up with are what they call quarks, that's one thing. But they call it a singularity. We have singularities. That's as far as I am aware as they've been able to go. And a singularity appears to work as energy. Okay? Everything then, the scientists tell us, everything comes from energy. Okay? Energy, get that straight. Religion then relies mostly on the Old Testament for its basis, for the way things are. The Old Testament is the one that says, thou shalt not. Then there's the New Testament, which was basically on the life of Jesus and says, thou shalt. So you have to make a decision what kind of consciousness you want to be living in. Do you want to be living in the old times with the old, rather negative ideas? Do you want to have strict rules about how you must live? Or do you want to live more the way Jesus declared, which was to love? Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Interesting to me that we have the hardest time with the last one, loving ourselves. But anyway, metaphysics, mind over matter. That's what metaphysics is, mind over matter. And what the way you think matters. The way you think matters. Okay? So back to quantum physics for a moment. Quantum physics has something that they call the observer effect. Now, I first understood there was such a thing many years ago, even though I didn't know what it meant. But I heard some scientists say that they could not work with the smallest, let's call it a quark, because if you looked at it, it moved. So what they say today is that this energy, this singularity, whatever your favorite word for that is, when we observe it, it reacts to our observation. It reacts to that. And when we observe it, it collapses out of its energy wave form and into little parts which become creation. That's how creation is created. That's scientific. And it's not just stuff, it's our experiences, it's how the way life works in the universe. It's all of those things, all of that, all of those things that you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, whatever, is that energy, that wave of possibilities. That's another thing that you'd like to say, the possibility of this wave energy. All of that is at the beginning, and when someone thinks, talks, acts, it changes and becomes. Which was very relieving for me, because I kept on asking myself, where does it all come from? And God is all there is didn't work for me. I'm too curious, and I get in a snit when I can't find my answers. We think, it's got to come down to us. We think. We need to understand that we then are the observer. And that singularity, if you like, becomes what is the focus of what we are thinking about when we are observing, when we are thinking, not the little silly thoughts that we have from time to time. I have all kinds of names for myself during those periods. But it's that dominant trend of our thinking that changes the way life is. So our dominant thoughts. We need to give up the other silly stuff anyway, but it's the dominant thoughts. So we then are using our thinking, using our minds to create our experience, to create our lives, which is really wonderful because it gives us the opportunity to each have something different, each be different. We wonder why we're all so different when we're all coming from the same singularity. But we are all different because we choose how we shall think. Let's see, what does Dr. Holmes have to say? I like this one, I really like this one. It is impossible to plumb the depths of the individual mind because the individual mind is really not individual. It is individualized. Behind the individual is the universal mind that we all use. We all use the creative power of the universal mind every time we use our own mind. So it's how you can, or how I can, pull everything together in my life when I want to look at something or someone or some event and say, that is not good. When at the same time I have a belief that God is all there is and all of this singularity is just God at work. And God is good. So there's so much to think about. But really it is all so simple. Dr. Holmes, elsewhere in the Science of Mind textbook, says, when this thinking is done deliberately to create, to change, to heal, what we are doing is using something called imagination. You see, Rayma was talking about her foot. She came up and dropped a shell. She wanted you to think of her walking on the beach. That will take imagination for you. Okay? You will have to imagine that. You don't know her that well. You haven't seen her walking on the beach. You don't know what that looks like. But you know how it would be for you. So you could imagine Rayma with that foot that they've been working on for over 2 years. is healed, it's wonderful, she can walk on the beach, she can even run on the beach. That will be your imagination at work, and one of the most powerful ways that we cause the singularity to change. That singularity that has been her experience up until now can change and become your experience of how she will be. And that is called a healing. Did you realize you could use your imagination for your healing? I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Somebody talked about the fact that Raina talked about the fact that we were going to take her dog. We want dogs. Most of our life with kids and all that stuff, we've had dogs. But we've been a little while now without one since she came to Florence. I want dogs. I want 2 dogs. I don't want a dog to be left on its own. I want 2 dogs. And so, I said to Colin, and we have nowhere where we live where we can have dogs without having to get up every 15 minutes and take them out to pee or whatever. I'm not doing that. But there is room if you talk about the ground that's around our house. And so I said to my husband, we need a dog run. I think in the beginning he had a different idea of what a dog run than I did. But it was so interesting because Obi, Raymond's husband, came into the picture. He had a dog run before we did. See? So we went round to his house and looked at his dog run. And what happened was that all 3 of us, because his house is different, all 3 of us came together, and what we now have as a dog run was the result of the 3 of us bringing our imaginations together and creating what we now have, you see? So that was 1 and 2 and 3 people using our imagination. Can you see where I'm going with this? What if we had a challenge and we had 20 people using their imagination, or 100, or 1,000? What could we do if a group of people like all of you, who all have, and I know we're not all alike, but we all have a similar way of looking at the world, and the way we would like the world to be if we don't think it's the way it should be. What if we all came together and put our imaginations together to have one healing about something that's going on in the world, something we would like to see changed? If we could believe that our consciousness together would affect that singularity, that quantum physics, that thing the scientists think about, we could have that healing. Do you remember years ago they used to have a certain time of the day, of a certain year or day of the year, everybody would ask to go think, meditate, pray for a healing, for peace? Do you remember when that was regular? Okay. And they did believe that it happened in certain towns, that things became peaceful and shootings went down. It made a difference. We just need to come together a little more closely and get better at it. All of that is possible. Let me read from Walter Starke. I've been reading him lately. Very good. He says, he talks first of all about having gone to a lecture, and it's interesting because I went to a lecture by the same man, I think several years before Walter did. Same guy, same topic, different way of putting it together. And so I was so interested to read this. He's talking about Greg Braden, for any of you that know him. Yeah. Okay. In Braden's lecture, he showed how scientific research has proved the effect of thought and emotion on our basic DNA. Hello, we're back to us. He explained that they had taken some saliva with its DNA from a donor, placed it in a measuring device, and then moved the donor to another part of the building. At exactly the same moment that the donor experienced an emotion, his DNA in the other room responded. So you can see how it is, and I know this has happened to many, many of you. The telephone has rung, and you, at the moment the telephone was ringing, had been thinking about Aunt Mary. And you pick up the phone, and, "Hi, this is your Aunt Mary." And you said, "Oh, I was just thinking about you." Those things are so much more than coincidences. There's something that we in religious science believe deeply. There is only one mind. That mind is the mind of God. That mind is my mind. It is the mind that I use. It is the power in my life, the mind of God. When I do treatment work for people, which is my word for prayer, when I do treatment work for people, and they say, "Oh, it's much better, I had a healing, this and this happened," I do not for one moment think that I did it. All I did was remember the truth. There is only one mind. That mind is the mind of God. That is the mind that moves. My mind doesn't move. Thank God, because I change it too often. He goes on to say, when we become aware of the spiritual implications of what science is revealing materially, we will at last experience what the mystics in both the Occident and the Orient have claimed to be true for centuries. That we individually have conscious access to an infinite divine intelligence that is the source and maintainer of all life. And that was all I wanted from him, but then I glanced, you know how a word catches your eye? The word that caught my eye was unity teachings. Because of these scientific revelations, the students of the unity teachings no longer have to take it on faith alone when they read how their founder, Myrtle Fillmore, cured herself of tuberculosis over 100 years ago by talking to the cells of her body. She talked to the cells of her body. See, I do this and didn't know she did it. Smart woman. Cured herself of tuberculosis over 100 years ago by talking to the cells of her body. She demonstrated that cells do have a kind of intelligence and that at some level we can communicate with them. Exactly what the scientists are now proving. So my idea about all of that is it's all one thing. They're all one thing. They're all saying it in different ways. The religionists and the scientists and all of those, they're all saying it the same way. And what they're all saying is, basically, it all comes back to us. It's us. We are doing the thinking. We are making the changes. We are the ones. Why is all of this important for me to talk about today? Well, I think why it's helping me is because I'm beginning to become more conscious, and forgive me for this, more conscious of how important I am. not me particularly, but how important we all are. How important we all are. Where did I get this one? Oh, yes. St. Augustine, I don't know if you know anything about St. Augustine. He was a very highly regarded, I'll call him a minister in his day, about in the early 400s, okay, back in the times just shortly after Jesus. In fact, one of the most highly respected, call him a minister in Western not religious science, but Western Christianity. Okay? And here's what he said, and it's so interesting to me. People travel to wonder at the heights of the mountains, at the huge waves of the sea, at the long courses of the rivers, at the vast compass of the ocean, at the circular motion of the stars. And they pass by themselves without wondering. We haven't. And you know why, and I hate to point fingers, but you know, it's helpful sometimes to be able to blame somebody else. Religion, and I'm not pointing at every religion, but religion in many cases has worked hard to make sure that we all understand that we come from down there, and they who know better, they're real close to God. And it has taken me a long time to find out, oh, it's one thing. It's all one thing. It's science, it's progress, it's why and how we progress, because we're doing these things. We all have been given, and this is me, we all have been given the ability to direct, not to beg or ask for, but to direct how God or spirit or life will show up in our lives. We get to take that, lost the word, responsibility. We, because we don't like responsibility, we have to take the responsibility for the way that spirit is showing up in our own individual lives. It's our choice. I want to prove to you that you can do this. I brought a little stone. I don't often bring things to show. This little stone. Let me see. Epictetus.
That's right.
Epicurus. No, not Epictetus. There's another one. Epicurus. Said, remember that what you now have is something you once hoped for. Think about it. What you now have is what you once hoped for. And a dear old friend who's long passed gave me this stone many years ago. Happiness is wanting what you have. Not wanting what, you know, it's not wanting to get it, it's the wanting it once you've already got it because it was real for you, wanting that. So I wanted to go one further than Ralph, bless you Ralph, thank you. I wanted to go one further than Ralph and say that for me, greater happiness is understanding what Epicurus was saying. I need to understand that what I now have came from my hope. Now here's something I want you to do right now. I would like you to take just a moment and think about something that you now have that once upon a time was a hope for you. May have been some education, may have been a Rolls Royce, may have been an RV, may have been whatever. See? For me, it's 2 little dogs. right now. I don't have that yet, but that's my investment. You see, that's going to be my hope, and I'll let you all know when I get them. That's going to be my hope. I know they're there. They're somewhere out there. They belong to me. They're coming. But can you this is not a rhetorical question. Just give me a show of a hand if you now realize that you have something because you've hoped for it. Oh, look at you. You all have used what I've been talking about. You have absolutely no excuse anymore. Let me close by coming back to the question that first got me off track. So I do apologize if I've been a little off track. That question, why didn't God stop it? And I had to think about it. It's a very last thing on my note because it took me a while to come up with a good answer. If God could have stopped it, God could have planned it. Okay? Dr. Holmes in the Science of Mind textbook, and I was able to look it up like that, doesn't plan. If you are waiting for God's plan for you to come true, forget it. There is only one, and that's not a plan, but there is only one plan in the universe that is for your good. And God does not think about what your good is. We have to have given up that anthropomorphic God that thinks about individual people and what they want. There is only one thing, and that is a pattern for good in the universe. And I think of when it snows, there are so many snowflakes and not one of them is patterned like another one, like our fingerprints. They're individual. We have individual fingerprints. There are patterns out there, and many of them are general. And that's why we come together in communities or find people we resonate with, because there is a pattern in their life, and we each are following that pattern, finding our way through that pattern. Those patterns are always for our good. And when we find ourselves walking backwards, pulling a ball and chain with us, it is because we have lost our idea of the truth, that all there is God. And all that God is that wonderful singularity of love being expressed as energy, waiting for us to make the first move. And so it is.